conference, and it is my distinct honor to serve as your compere. It is a privilege to welcome our distinguished dignitaries, esteemed speakers, faculty members, researchers, students, and participants joining us here at JSS Law College Autonomous Mysuru, as well as those joining us virtually from across the globe. As we begin today's proceeding, it is worth reflecting that in the modern world, energy is not merely a commodity. It is a source of influence, security, and cooperation. It is this understanding that brings us together for this international conference, jointly organized by JSS Law College, Autonomous Mysuru, in collaboration with Center for Environmental Education, Research and Advocacy, CEERA, National Law School of India University, Bengaluru. It is important to note that our conference today comes at a very exciting time. Just very recently, on the 77th Indian Republic Day, India and EU finished a major rounds of talk to finalize a new free trade agreement. These meetings focus heavily on green energy, specifically how both regions can work together on green hydrogen and clean technology to meet climate goals. This makes our discussion today more than just academic, but it gives us a glimpse of the future partnership between India and the European Union. Before we proceed, I request all participants to kindly note a few ground rules. Microphones must be muted and phones must be silent. Attendance is mandatory. Certificates will be issued only upon full attendance and submission of the feedback form, which will be circulated at the end of the conference. Questions may be posted in the chat box and it will be taken up during the Q&A. We request everyone to maintain decorum throughout the program. To commence today's program on an auspicious note, I invite Ms. Likita S. Gowda to render the invocation song.
श्री गौरी सुत सिद्धि विनायक मंगलमूर्ति गणराय श्री गौरी सुत सिद्धि विनायक मंगलमूर्ति गणराय मूषिक वाहन नाग विभूषण परमदया गण शुभकाय श्री गौरी सुत सिद्धि विनायक मंगलमूर्ति गणराय ಸರ್ವಕಾಲದಲ್ಲಿ ಸರ್ವಕಾರ್ಯದಲ್ಲಿ ಮೊದಲಿಗೆ ನಿನ್ನನ್ನು ಪೂಜಿಸುತ್ತ ಸರ್ವಕಾಲದಲ್ಲಿ ಸರ್ವಕಾರ್ಯದಲ್ಲಿ ಮೊದಲಿಗೆ ನಿನ್ನನ್ನು ಪೂಜಿಸುತ್ತ ಸರ್ವರು ಸಹಜದಿ ಬಯಸಿದ ಬಯಕೆಯ ಪಡೆವರು ನಿನ್ನನ್ನು ಧ್ಯಾನಿಸುತ್ತ ಶ್ರೀ ಗೌರಿ ಸುತ ಸಿದ್ಧಿ ವಿನಾಯಕ ಮಂಗಳಮೂರ್ತಿ ಗಣರಾಯ ಮೂಷಿಕ ವಾಹನ ನಾಗ ವಿಭೂಷಣ ಪರಮದಯಾ ಗಣ ಶುಭಕಾಯ ಶ್ರೀ ಗೌರಿ ಸುತ ಸಿದ್ಧಿ ವಿನಾಯಕ ಮಂಗಳಮೂರ್ತಿ ಗಣರಾಯ ಮಂಗಳಮೂರ್ತಿ ಗಣರಾಯ ಮಂಗಳಮೂರ್ತಿ ಗಣರಾಯ. Thank you.
Thank you, Likita, for setting a serene and thoughtful tone for today's conference. We shall now proceed with the nurturing of the sapling, symbolizing growth and sustainability. May I respectfully invite our esteemed dignitaries to kindly take part in the ceremony. No. Come in. Thank you, respected dignitaries. I now invite Dr. N. Vanishri, Principal, JSS Law College Autonomous, Mysuru, to deliver the welcome address.
A very pleasant morning to the distinguished guests and esteemed speakers and one and all present here for the conference. It is my distinct honor and pleasure to welcome all of you to this international conference on the India-EU Energy Partnership under the FTAs and BITs here at JSS Law College located at the heritage city of Mysuru. We all have gathered here to discuss a topic of global importance. In a rapidly evolving world, the challenges we face regarding energy issues under the FTAs and BITs require more than ever a collaborative and an international approach. This conference aims to foster that dialogue, providing a space for us to share cross-cutting edges and issues with regard to research, innovative ideas, and practical solutions. At the outset, I would like to extend my deepest gratitude to the chief guest, Professor Dr. Nicholas D. Chadlier, Professor, ordained full professor, Chair Jean Monnet. He's from Brussels, Belgium. Sir, a very warm welcome to you on behalf of the college and my personal behalf. We are very thankful, and it's my earnest duty to welcome Dr. Professor Sairam Bhatt, who is with us here, our college alumnus, and has been contributing with us to his college in all the academic endeavors. A warm welcome to you. A warm welcome to our Chief Executive, Professor K. Suresh sir, who has been leading us in all the activities of the college. Sir, a warm welcome to you, sir. Dr. Syed Kudrat Hashibi, the conference coordinator, and who's been responsible to bring to our college Dr. Nicholas. A warm welcome to you too. He's also our college alumna. Mr. Josben Thomas, the organizing secretary, all my teaching and non-teaching colleagues, student coordinators, and all my beloved students. Let's make this the most, the best opportunity to create meaningful connections and drive progress. A very warm welcome once again to all of you who are present here. Awesome. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah, I'm sorry. So we have Ms. Gayatri here and the other students here who are here with us from the whole NLSIU team. A very warm welcome to you too. Thank you, sir, for reminding. And I would now, without further ado, I would like to give you all a brief profile of Professor Nicholas D. Chadlier, and then request him to take over so that we don't waste much of the time. So the brief summary of his main expertise include the practical and theoretical knowledge of international law, especially the law of environment, EU law institutions, internal market, environment, health and consumer protection, comparative law, so on and so forth. Education, he is involved in the educational programs like conferences and seminars. He's provided educational training by way of guiding the PhD students, LLM students, the civil servants, judges, and the attorneys. His editorial work has got a long list, and I would request every one of you to just go through the internet to know more about his editorial work and his publications. And he's also involved in the international consultancy work. Presently, he is the chair at the Jean Monnet Chair of EU Law at the University of Brussels, Belgium. Marie Curie Chair on Risk Assessment and Risk Management at the University of Oslo. Glavable Chair on Chemical Law at the University of Louvain with Mr. Joel Tickner, currently employed at Belgium, as I just gave you the information. And he has been working, his previous employments include as a guest professor, the visiting professor, and also the consultant for law and the consultancy firms, postdoctoral research fellow, part-time lecturer in Lily Charles, and part-time lecturer on environmental law, barrister at the Brussels Bar, barrister at the Military Court of Nahum, employee at the Belgian Royal Institute of Natural Sciences, stagiaire and consultant for the European Commission, DG Environment. And he also is a member of the commission, which is Council National D Discipline. And to sum up, his specialized areas include European Union law, EU institutions, international environmental law, EU environmental law, EU health and consumer policies, and so on. Editorial of, he's been an editorial of law journals, member of the editorial advisory boards of the European Journal of Risk Regulation, Lexicon, member of the editorial board of the Journal of European Environmental and Planning Law, member of the editorial board of the Amendment Environment, CLUA, member of the director board of the Revue du Droit de Union, European Union, and also he is involved among the group of experts like Client Earth, International Council of Environmental Law, and so on and so forth. And he is he knows the following languages. His mother tongue is French. He is fluent in English, Dutch, Spanish, and Norwegian. And professional experiences outside Europe, Africa. He's running few missions to Benin as a consultant for the Belgian Development Authorities. Asia, a guest professor at the Asian Institute of Technology, organizations of meetings and seminars in Tokyo and Kyoto. Latin America, he's a guest professor of the Pontificia Universidad Católica del Perú. North America, he is a regular member and attends meetings at the US and Canadian universities on environmental transatlantic dialogue, guest lecturer at the Pace Law School, New York. So this is just the gist of Professor, and much more he's got to his achievements and throughout his career. And we are very, very honored and blessed to have him here. And over to you, sir.
Thank you, ma'am, for those inspiring words. On behalf of the organizing committee, I welcome you also, ma'am. I now invite Dr. Syed Qudrat Hashmi, conference coordinator, to present the conceptual note of the conference.
A very good morning to one and all here. Distinguished Professor Sairam Bhatt, Professor Nicolas Desadlier, full Professor UC Louvain, St. Louis, Belgium, and Chair of Jean Monnet, and Adjunct Professor at New York School, Kerala. Professor K. Suresh, Chief Executive, JSS Law College, Principal Ma'am, Dr. N. Vanishri, my colleagues and friends. It is my honor and privilege today to be part of this program, AU and the India Energy Partnership under Free Trade Agreement and Bilateral Investment Treaties. Of course, energy falls at the heart of the economic growth, geopolitics, and climate actions. This partnership for today, it compels us to think over the energy sectors. So from the legal perspective, we can see both renewable energy, which is solar, wind, and hydro, which is cheap, but somehow in international market, it is a competitive and it requires, and it of course, it is a climate friendly. But on the other side, we have non-renewable energy such as coal, and we have oil and so on. But that determine a lot of issues, legal issues to be discussed, such as climate and carbon adjustment, which European Union is now dealing with. And the relationship between India and the European Union in this regard can be seen in two issues, in two approaches. India demands energy because of urbanization, and now is touching to globalization, and India is not the world India in 2012, which I came to India, but today India is more attached to technology, starting from your small phone pay, booking, and coming till Mysuru. Even Professor Nicholas, when I explained this in coaching, that the hotel booking reservation can be done through mobile phone, a food order phone connected from the place, the table which you sit, to the kitchen which the food is being prepared and ordered for us. So this is, we could say, modern India. And on the other hand, European Union is also looking towards energy autonomy and working towards the multilateral investment courts to make facilitate the trade flows of Europe to India, particularly in Africa and China. With this regards, I don't want to take much time. Energy is important for the digital infrastructure, digital economic driven, and the powering our industries, urbanization, transport system, and so on. So here, two very prominent energy experts are sitting. It would be very difficult for me to take time further ado. I would like to request now Professor Layer to share his thought. And we like to have the computer here, so I would like to present PPT. Thank you. No, he wants a computer here. Yeah. No, you get sir, you place it. Yeah. Yeah, this guy. Does it work? Next slide. Can you push the table again?
Mr. the Chief Executive Director, Mrs. Principal, dear colleagues, dear students, it's an honor and a pleasure to come here in this historical and heritage city to deliver a speech in when India and the EU are gaining momentum in trying to form free trade agreement containing a number of chapters ranging from public procurement to technical barriers to trade, ranging from sustainable development to geographical indications. And so, as you are aware, energy has become the kernel, at least from a European point of view, regarding our strategic autonomy. The EU is facing an absence of natural resources and its dependence upon fuels, gas, or solar panels, or even critical minerals to achieve its developments. And so the dependency is tantamount to vulnerability, and vulnerability in times where different leaders expose a more imperialistic vision is bordering on a threat to the autonomy of the European Union. Before starting to delve into more technical issues, I would like to emphasize that I'm an academic, as it was stressed by Mrs. Principal, and so I'm not talking on behalf of the European Union, although I am advising also the EU institution being based in Brussels, the capital of the European Union. But as an academic, entirely independent from the institutional interest. In addition, I would like to stress that the European Union is neither a confederation nor a federation. It's an association of 27 states being linked to other states such as Switzerland or such as Liechtenstein, Norway, and Iceland through the conclusions of specific treaties. So the geography of the European Union is somewhat complicated even for European students. But in contrast to other organizations such as ASEAN, Mercosur, African Union, CEDEAO, the European Union's strength is based upon the rule of law, is based upon this ability to enact legislation, binding legislation. So the picture is somewhat different from the Council of Europe based in Strasbourg, where the Council of Europe is proposing to the 41 parties the conclusions of treaties on the criminal issues, on civil issues, on the intellectual property rights. Here, the institutions, when they adopt legislations, these legislative acts are binding, and so they must be applied by thousands of national authorities, as well as hundreds of thousands of undertakings and administries. So that's a striking difference. And so the conclusion of a treaty between the Union of India and the European Union is we have two different partners. So one has to bear in mind that the European Union will never perhaps become a federation. But nevertheless, as an association, it's displaying specific features, and it's we come upon the ability to enact binding legislation. And it seems to me that there is no shortage of legislations when it comes to energy. Given that I've been, as it was stressed by the principal, that I worked for many years on pollution and lately to a greater extent on climate change. I will approach the subject matter not from an internal market point of view, but from a sustainability point of view, which makes sense because my colleague, Dr. Rashmi, was kind enough to organize in the US a conference on the integration of sustainability in free trade agreements. So it's a bit somewhat, this conference is a continuation of the three conferences I gave a few days ago in Kochi. So the starting point is the European Green Deal, which was envisioned in December 2019 by the former European Commission, which was headed by President van der Leyen, who is today presiding the board in mandate, and which is continuing a job in Brussels. And the European Green Deal was a response to the aspiration of European youth demonstrating in the streets for obtaining a genuine climate change policy at state level. It was also a response to the increasing threats stemming from climate change, given that Europe is facing several severe issues related to the warming of the continent. Europe is the continent warming at very high speeds, much higher speeds than the other continents. And it was also a reflection of the needs of the long-term needs of achieving strategic autonomy. As I stressed already, Europe is far too dependent when it comes to energy and when it comes to critical minerals and particular rare earths to the imports from other continents. And this dependency entails vulnerability. The genius of the European Green Deal lies in the polycentric approach. So, as you know, in India, be it at state level or at union level, you do experience pseudo politics. As Minister of Agriculture is competent for agriculture, Minister of Industry is competent for industry, Ministry for foreign trade is dealing with foreign trade. And in today's world, this pseudo approach doesn't function well enough on the account that the challenges your generation is facing are transversal challenges and not vertical challenges. And the genius of this reform was to interlink agriculture with industry, with climate issues, with societal issues, with health, with transport, with also green financing. And so the red thread of the reform was to make all the different sectors more sustainable. So with insights, it seems to me that it has been the most audacious legislative reform undertook on this planet, and the arcing principle, the key goal to be pursued was to achieve, according to the European Climate Law of 2021, climate neutrality by 2050, stage by stage, on the account that we have to reduce by 2040 our greenhouse gas emissions according to the 2005 background by 90%. And of course, such a reform was likely to give rise controversies, oppositions, be it from businesses, be it from farmers, be it from the citizens. Why? Because the fact of integrating negative externalities in price of products and goods makes the production process and the consumption process much more expensive. So far, consumers, at least in Europe, are somewhat kind of free riders. They have a significant footprint, as the Australians, as the North Americans, but they don't pay the price for that footprint. And when it comes to climate change, the debate goes around the issue of justice. Why poor Indian farmers will have to pay the hefty price of droughts caused by climate change that has been provoked since the industrial revolutions by developed nations, and that the Western consumers will still be free riders. So there is also an issue of justice, an issue of international justice as well as an issue of national justice. And so although this reform entails a transition, that transition will be a long-term transition. It's going to be painful because there will be ongoing opposition, there will be tears, there will be blood, but there is no other way the European Union can move. And there is also an issue of national justice because it's easier for a wealthy person to purchase an electric car to offset its carbon footprint when it's taking an airplane that for poor persons highly indebted to change this consumption pattern. So the European Green Deal was intended to turn the European Union into the first decarbonized and circular economy in the world. Decarbonized, why? Because if you want to achieve climate neutrality, you need to get rid of fossil fuels and to replace them by green energy. And circular, why circularity? For the simple fact that we do not own the critical minerals, and so in order to boost the production of batteries, the production of solar panels, of wind energy, we need to indulge into a circular economy model, which is a breaking point from a linear economic model where one produces, one consumes, and one is throwing away, discarding the waste products. And so there will be, on the one hand, a growth pillar. The reform does not call into question the economic growth, but the growth must be pursued thanks to a decarbonized circular industrial policy. And within the frame of sustainable development, social assets must be taken into consideration with a strong input from the European society, which is rather challenging. As I explained, many consumers are not ready to tie their belt in order to purchase greener products. And this is really, these two pillars do underpin the nexus between energy, new energy production and consumption model, and the climate component. So this reform is unprecedented in the history of public policy. It's complemented by a policy program called Fit for 55. The notion of 55 relates to the first step to be achieved by 2030, which is a reduction of 55% of the greenhouse gases that were emitted in 2005. And apparently, according to several reports, we are likely to achieve this first goal in 4 years from now. So we are on the right track as in the first stage to achieve on the long term by 2050 climate neutrality. The transversality of the European Green Deal can be explained by the fact that climate change is on the part of a larger megatrend of environmental degradations linked to overexploitation of natural resources. So the fact of the matter is that you can place full focus on energy transition. That won't be enough, because what matters is the proper management of soil, of water, of conservation of biodiversity, conservation of ecosystems. So one should avoid to focus the policy on merely one single issue. The modern policies should be all embracing and energy transition must be accompanied by a new model of zero pollutions, of control of chemical substances, of controls of waste management, and so on and so forth. And that makes, of course, the regulatory approach much more complex, because it's easier to address verticality than to address transversality. So what you can find, I published an article in Cambridge University Press, the Journal of European Risk Regulation. That's online, it's free. I should type my name, because I can forward you the reference, where I've been trying to decipher the different mega trends. Because given that a majority of students, what's important if you want to be excellent lawyers is to understand the rationale of the legal system, is to understand the ratio of the judgments, to analyze coming from the civil faculty. And what's really important at the outset when I start a consultation is to delve into the objectives pursued by the lawmakers, to understand causes leading the lawmaker to adjust its regulatory intervention. And that allows me then, in the second stage, to delve into much more technical, complicated issues. And so what struck me is really the threat of this reform that took place in difficult circumstances in COVID, when the civil servants, the politicians had to gather online on screen. And so it's much easier to negotiate regulation face-to-face than to do it on Zoom. The speed with which the different legal instruments, so it's about 160 amending legislations or new legislations, were adopted on the account that by 2021, the climate neutrality had to be achieved by 2050, and the first goal of a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 was already laid down and was already binding. And so the fact that an objective is so close in 5-6 years, that requires the lawmaker to adopt a number of new legislations in order to unfold this transversal approach. The binding nature, as I stressed, in contrast to the African Union or to the Mercosur, which are organizations quite toothless organizations when it comes to binding instruments, the strength of the European unification is reckoning upon directives and regulations that are binding. And of course, there is also a need to explain the scope of these instruments, thanks to a number of communications. Often the adoption of a legal instrument is preceded by white papers explaining the different policy choices. And last but not least, the complementary between the internal measures and external action on the economic militarism failed on the account of the World Trade Organization reforms, plus the European Union, as well as other Western countries such as the United Kingdom, intent upon concluding a free trade agreement with third nations, among which India. And so I will address two issues. Firstly, the climate component of this Fit for 55 program of 2021. And then second, the energy component of the Fit for 55. And you will quickly understand the extent to which the two components are entangled, somewhat entangled. And so regarding the climate change component, I will address climate change neutrality. I will explain you how it unfolds. The CBAM regulations that was discussed in the conference that was organized in the US, and I'm fully aware that there is much resentment in India against CBAM. I will try again to explain what are the objective pursuit. That's not supposed to be a discriminatory regulation, the FRCRA regulations and the LULUCF regulation. And secondly, what about energy? It recomes upon the buildings. So where Europe is a rather cold continent, so there is a lot of energy being consumed and being lost. The recast of the green energy directives in order to boost green energy production, solar production, so the wind production, in order to substitute to the fuel consumption, to the gas consumption, and finally energy efficiency. So of course this is only a short conference. I could organize a lecture of 30 or 60 hours lectures on this subject matter, but the challenge for the academic is the ability to sum up, to wrap up complex issues in a very So the main narrative when it comes to neutral climate change is to decouple economic growth from resource use. The creed is that it's possible to achieve growth while reducing the greenhouse gases. So far, it has been the case on the account that many oil plants were closed, like the coal, the coal plants, the coal energy plants were closed in order to be replaced by gas power plants. It has been also achieved thanks to the increased recourse to new technologies. And that led really to a significant abatement of greenhouse gas emissions. But in contrast, when it comes to agriculture and transport, either the level of emission has been stable or is on the increase. And so the figures vary from one country to another country, even within country, from one region to another region. But this narrative is subject to criticism, is subject to controversies, for the mere fact that consuming leads to the productions of more waste. And consuming will always, there's a rebounding effect where the consumer will consume more goods and therefore consume more energy and then therefore produce more energy. Second idea is that the transition should be fair. There should not be part of the communities left aside. The third idea is that climate change policy should foster the conservation of natural heritage. That would be the case of the LULUCF regulations that aims at storing 310,000 tons of CO2 in traditional landscapes. And what matters on the long run is to protect the health of our communities because there is a correlation between very high temperatures in cities and an increase of the debt tolls, in particular among elderly persons. And as you're aware, the European population is getting older and older. So climate neutrality is really the first legislation on this planet where the maker has laid on such ambitious goals, setting this binding objective to be achieved for each of the 27 member states of the Union by 2050. And that's linked to the interim obligations that the European Union and its member states are subject to, this Paris Agreement in December 2015. That does not state climate neutrality, but provides for the obligations to avoid to exceed 1.5 average degrees of temperatures increase, and in a worst case scenario to achieve 2 degrees Celsius increase in the future. And so what's interesting is that in laying down that, in adopting that legislation, the first binding target was by 2030, so 4 years from now, to reduce by 55% the domestic greenhouse gases. And the second objective by 2040 was just adopted a few months ago by the lawmaker, and they hammered out an agreement to achieve the reductions by 90% in 2040, which is extremely challenging from a technical point of view. So it might be a hurdle for many engineers as a matter of a modification of transport means of industrial production. This legislation provides a framework for achieving progress. So this won't be a last-minute checkup in 2049 to assess. It's really step-by-step, stage-by-stage approach. And as a matter of law, the European climate law has been accompanied by much more specific legislation regarding transportation to get rid of fuel-powered cars by 2025 and to replace these fuel diesel-powered cars by electric cars in a very short time span. And amazingly enough, one can be impressed by the array of legislative instruments regarding the scope, the level of ambition, but also by the level of technical complexity, because be it airplanes, be it trucks, be it motorcycles, be it cars, be it light vehicles, be it fuels. These issues are technically complex, and also all this legislation will have to be fleshed out by specific commissions regulations on the account that the lawmaker cannot address every technical issues while adopting the legislative instrument. And so of interest is to assess the progress that we're realizing just about 3 years, which was about modifying the 2005 carbon market in encompassing aviation as well as maritime transport, but also setting up a new carbon market encompassing the consumptions of fuels by small-sized industries and by consumers. Also modifying the effort sharing regulation that encompass everything that's not falling within the scope of the 2005 carbon market. improving the regulation on the removal of greenhouse gases from land use change and forestry, and new legislation, the carbon border adjustment mechanism related to the consumption of goods imported from third countries where there is no CO2 taxations or genuine carbon markets. So in the European Union, the carbon market is deemed to be the cornerstone, is deemed to be the kernel of the climate policy. It's covering actually around 38% of the greenhouse gases produced on the territory of the 27 member states. And this mechanism operates on the basis of the law of supply and demand. Operators of fixed installations, such as cement steel mills, as well as operators of aircraft and even new futures operators of maritime transport, must surrender allowances on the market. One can so far benefit from allowances allocated to of charging the carbon leakage. And so this surrendering of the allowances is taking place year by year. So the companies, the undertaking must purchase the auction sales the allowances in order to cover their actual emissions. And at the end of the year, they have to surrender the exact amount of allowances covering their actual emissions. In case they don't cover all the emissions, they are likely to be fined by the public authorities, and in addition to purchase the missing allowances. So the scheme is binding. Some companies have been fined by the national authorities on the grounds that they did not calculate well enough the amount of allowances that was supposed to cover their actual emissions. This is not a free market. This is a regulated market, and it's a cap and trade market. The cap is laid down by the lawmaker, and the cap is shrinking year by year. So it means that although the economy is growing, there will be fewer and fewer allowances on the market. And why is that cap diminishing? For the mere fact of obliging the undertakings to invest in new technologies in order to diminish the need of purchasing allowances. So if one company emits 100,000 tons of CO2 a year and succeed to diminish by 50% the emissions of greenhouse gases, allowances. So the investment in new technologies will translate into a reduction of the price to be paid to purchase allowances. So it's really the cap and the interactions between the cap and trade. So the trade in allowances is taking place within that European Union cap. And so a Belgian undertaking in need to purchase more allowances to cover extra emissions because that company has been building new plants. These allowances can be purchased from a French company or German company or Slovakian company. So it's a free market within the cap, but with the obligation to surrender at the end of the year the allowances, and then next January to start to purchase on the market the allowances that are required to cover the forthcoming emissions throughout the year. So the territorial scope is quite impressive. It's not only the 27 member states, but the market applies also to the 3 FTA states, Liechtenstein, Iceland, and Norway. as well as Northern Ireland, the protocol of Northern Ireland on Northern Ireland, including with the British authorities, provides for the application of the carbon market to Northern Ireland. And so this has a significant consequence, in particular in the electric sectors. So in particular in Germany and in Central Europe, the energy was produced mostly thanks to coal production. And so the national undertakings have been shifting the technologies, moving to gas storage plants in order to reduce the emissions of CO2, but also in the industrial manufacturing. When it comes to aviation, the progress so far has been more spectacular, but it seems to me that there is much research and development in the aviation sectors to reduce their contribution to greenhouse gases. Many Europeans believe that the carbon market applies only to the emissions of CO2. This is not the only issues. Methane produced by heating, by agriculture, intensive agriculture, is also one of the key issues, because the potent methane is 125 more significant than CO2, although methane doesn't last only 25 years in the atmosphere, whereas the CO2 will last 125 years. But you have also nitrous oxide is a pollutant, and perfluorocarbon, that's also deemed to be a pollutant. So the greenhouse gases are complex because some straddle on environmental pollution, where others, such as CO2, are harmless. We are breathing CO2, like CO2 around us, and CO2 had made life possible on this planet. And so what's really fantastic here is that the target is to achieve a 62% reduction in gross greenhouse gas emissions. And this new objective has been laid on in 2014. And in order to achieve, we need this significant reduction. The initial plan to grant for free the allowance to the undertakings will be cancelled, will be abrogated. So in the beginning, 2007, 2008, 2009, the state authorities were not organizing auction sales. They were conferring for free the allowance. And the fact, if you get the allowance for free, you won't invest in new technologies because you don't have to pay for the allowance. And the fact of abrogating the carbon leakage systems and shifting into auction sales is obliging the takings to take into consideration the need to invest in new technologies in order to avoid extra costs. But the cap reduction is not a one shot. If you look at the figure, it's increasing year by year. So the pressure placed upon aviation, upon maritime sector, upon undertakings will increase year by year. So it's not a one-shot investment where the company says, okay, I'm going to invest 25 million euros into new technologies to diminish, to reduce my emissions. And fair enough, that will be sufficient because really the cap is shrinking time and again. Of course, the market is generating revenues. In 2023, these revenues amount to 43 billion. Half of these revenues have to be streamlined into climate mitigation or climate change adaptation. The other half can be channeled to social security. And so the revenues, the new revenues will be invested in specific funds, innovation funds, modernization funds, and social climate funds. Given it's a free market, the price of the allowances is changing day by day. So it has been rather low so far because the system was far from being perfect. But given the forthcoming scarcity of allowances being sold, one can expect that the average price will be above 100 euros. So the companies will have to calculate the timing when they need to purchase their allowances. So in case of in the course of the COVID, the price of the allowance were falling sharply on the grounds that many companies suspended their production. So the achievements are significant. Just look at the figures. By 2023, an average reduction by 55% was achieved compared to the 2005 levels. So 10,000 installations in particular in the energy sectors and manufacturing sectors, be it petroleum plants, chemical plants, steel mills, cement kilns, textile industries are part of this scheme. And so far, the aviation has been subject for 10 years to the change, but given the industrial competition, because you are aware that Air Italia, Lufthansa are facing significant competition, in particular with Emirates Airlines, with Qatar Airlines, and they've been losing much markets. And so the idea has been to run to control for free the allowances to avoid extra pressure. In many member states, the legislature was unhappy about that. And recently, in Germany, in Belgium, in France, the legislature has been adopting tax law in order to tax not the fuels, but to tax the airplane tickets. But of course, this a neutral state approach, and the tax rate is likely to vary. So some member states like Czechia did not decide to embrace this approach. There is no unified tax schemes at European level, not the greenhouse gas, on the account that the tax powers of the EU is rather limited. So regarding aviation, there will be a phase out of free allocation that will take place in accordance to linear reduction factors. And so in addition to the Belgian tax on the ticket, the economic operators such as Brussels Airlines will increase the price of the transport. And so the contribution to the green to the carbon markets will be fleshed out in an increase in the pricing of the transport. So according to the studies, it will vary by from 5% to a 12% increase. Of course, regarding the intra-flights or flight from Brussels to New Delhi, it won't be subject to the new scheme. These flights will be subject to a more complex, perhaps much less binding scheme named CORSIA, Carbon Offsetting and Reduction Scheme for International Aviation. So the European Union has been quite cautious. It would have been actually, according to the case law of the Court of Justice of the Union, the lawmaker was empowered to cover also flights from Beijing or from Washington to Brussels. but as a matter of internal policies, the lawmaker has been key in applying the new scheme only to flights such as Oslo, Madrid, or Madrid or Brussels, to not fly to the European Union. When it comes to maritime sector, this is really somewhat amounting to a revolution. The maritime transport accounts for around 3 to 4% of the EU greenhouse gases. So that's the actual climate footprint of the European consumers. That a teenager purchasing garments from Chinese factories in Chengdu through Chinese platform will increase its carbon footprint because there will be greenhouse gas emissions in Shenzhen, in China, transport value, the cargo, the containers being transported on vessels will emit further greenhouse gases. And so the climate footprint will be much higher in purchasing Chinese garments than in purchasing French produced garments. And so the EU is intent on reducing greenhouse gas emissions from maritime activities. And so the maritime sector is falling within the scope of the 2005 market. So you understand this would be a step-by-step process. And there must be many lessons to be learned by the Indian authorities, because the Indian authorities one day want to move on to these issues. It's unrealistic to complete the whole scheme at the outset. The approach must be incremental, and that has been the case with firstly fixed installation, then aviation, and the third step in achievement today is the inclusion of the maritime sectors. And again, this is a very incremental approach, utterly complex, because one cannot encompass all of a sudden the maritime companies. So it requires adaptation on the administrative side. So custom authorities must be prepared to deal with greenhouse gases emitted by maritime transport sectors, but also the sector itself must prepare to the new rules. And so the gap will diminish, and that's leading you, if you look at this picture, it's really the number of transport that will be subject to the carbon markets will be increased, but it will cover only 50% of the greenhouse gases emitted. So in contrast to aviation, there is no free allowances. Given the minimal risk of carbon leakage. So carbon leakage is really the distortion of the common playing field. Whereas in aviation, there is constant risk of distortion of the playing field. And that's the case of Emirates Airlines and Qatar Airlines, companies that have been extremely successful in taking over Lufthansa for the fact that the airport is quite well located between Asia and Europe, and that the energy cost is far lower than energy cost French, German companies have to pay, and that explains why this carbon leakage derogation was conceived with respect to aviation. And another revolution is to encompass into a new carbon market the emissions created by the fuels consumed in the heating of buildings and in transportation by light vehicles, by trucks and by cars. And so, in order, so one is really diverting from the traditional approach where the legislator increased the tax rates on the gasoline, on the diesel, thanks to specific duties. And again, the EU has really limited powers when it comes to taxation. And the proper vehicle to address that source of greenhouse gas emission has been the creation of a new carbon market. So instead of taxing 225 million consumers, the idea is to oblige 250 oil companies, such as Shell, Chevron, Texaco, Total to be part of the market and to have only 250 major undertakings taking part in the scheme is quite an easy operation because it's easier to control 250 main operators placing on the market the fuel products than to control and to monitor the emissions of thousands of companies. And so this new scheme will lead to the increase of the price at the pump of gasoline and diesel. And so this is a picture explaining the new scheme. So we will have to juggle with two different carbon markets. Of course, consumers driving cars are always upset when they are facing price hike on the pumps. But this has been the sovereign choice of the EU lawmakers. So they can demonstrate that this is a private market, but a regulated private market. So the Chevron Shell will pass the extra cost to the consumers. So that's explained this slide. It's really the end consumers will be confronted with an increase in price of hydrocarbons from 2027, thanks to the setting up of this new carbon market. Then, last but not least, is CBAM, and that's a stumbling block in the negotiations between the EU and India to hammer out a free trade agreement. That cannot be part of the free trade agreement. This is a genuine EU legislation, and there cannot be a specific derogation for the Indian undertakings, because that would be somewhat a kind of derogation, discrimination. So all foreign companies, be it South Korean, Japanese, Brazilian, Argentinian, Mexican, American, North American companies are subject to CBAM by just entering into force. And so the rationale is to avoid carbon leakage. So the French, the German, the Belgian companies are facing the globalized economy, significant competition from foreign companies for a number of factors. The European undertakings face significant social security costs, significant business taxes, significant labor compliance costs, significant environmental and security compliance costs, auditing costs regarding financial issues. And so it means that the goods and the services produced by Belgian companies will be much higher. The labor costs are quite high. So the hourly wage of qualified labor in Belgium could amount quickly to 50, 60 euros when one includes social security costs. But Belgium has one of the best social security in the world. So the question, should we sacrifice the quality of our social security approach for global competition, or should we maintain the affordance of our social security? But that we do face more significant internal competition. And so, since the beginning of the carbon market in 2007, 2008, the European Union has been providing for derogation for the companies facing the risk of delocalization. So Belgian companies will calculate whether it's smart to produce in Belgium and to face higher costs, and to move its production plants to India, because they won't be carbon costs, there will be less significant environmental climate costs. And so it has been the idea is that the companies should breathe a sigh of relief temporarily before being subject to the allowances costs. It's really to avoid climate dumping. But many economists criticize that derogation on the account that it does not incentivize the companies to invest in new technologies. So companies benefiting a derogation might endorse a very lazy behavior. I just, okay, wait and see. In as much as we are subject to the scheme, but we don't have to purchase in order and say the allowance to cover our emissions, we are fine with this. And so what's really the breaking point that was decided 2 years ago is to get rid of the derogation, carbon leakage, and to oblige all the economic operators to jump into the fray, to be subject, to be fully subject to the scheme. But then the question of internal competition is still there. And the idea, the rationale is to avoid the distortion of the common playing field. And given that European companies might be tempted to purchase cheaper Japanese or Chinese steel, there will be unfair competition, so to speak. And CBAM rationale is to readjust the prices of the foreign products with the price of the products produced in Europe with respect to a number of sectors: cement, aluminium, electricity, fertilizer, hydrogen, iron, and steel. Why? Well, it's a short list. Because again, it's a very incremental approach. One cannot embrace as a legislator all the products because it will be unbearable for administration. And the second reason is that this the production process to produce hydrogen, iron, steel are significant as a matter of greenhouse gas emissions. And so it makes sense from a technical point of view to subject these products to the scheme, CBAM scheme. And so the CBAM scheme is somewhat a way to provide for this common playing field. This is a picture I took from a cement plant in Wallonia, 60 kilometers from my home. And you see how derelict it looked like. And so the fact of requiring such a company to invest in purchasing new equipment might lead it to bankruptcy. And so in order to avoid to face significant competition in Europe with cheaper Iranian or Turkish cement, there is this need to subject this imported product to a specific certificate. So CBAM is really aiming at complementing the carbon market schemes. It's aiming at carving out a genuine common playing field between the companies. And for that reason, it works in the same way as the carbon market, because each importers of cement, of steel, of iron, of nickel will have to declare the emissions contained in the products. But the CO2 or the NO2 is not in the steel. It has already been produced in Zhejiang in China or in Okawa in Japan. And so the fact of the matter is that the calculation must include the actual emissions that took place either in South America, in North America, or in Asia, and the value of the certificates will encompass the emissions that were created. And of course, the companies exporting cement or iron or electricity to Europe will be incentivized to reduce their emissions to avoid the purchase of certificates. And so, if you look at this picture, we clearly see that the carbon market has been subject to a major renovation with full inclusions of aviation and maritime transport, the creation of the new carbon markets that apply to oil products, to fuels purchased by consumers, small-sized industries, and finally, CBAMs covering different products. And so the idea is that the allowances, on the one hand, with respect to the carbon market, covers 1 ton CO2, whereas the CBAM certificates will cover 1 ton CO2 of emissions, but embedded in the steel, in the electricity, in nickel. They won't be cap and trade, and they won't be cap and trade. One cannot envision the global market for the certificates. So the certificates will have to be purchased by the importers, not by the exporters, but by the German importers in the custom authorities. And the duty is to, at the end of the year, to submit the amount of certificates that covers all the emissions that were done in Argentina or in Mexico. In addition, to complement this true carbon market, there are new obligations regarding the states, the 27 states. There is, of course, emissions from waste management sites, from farming undertakings, and they contribute also to this phenomenon. And the member states are obligated to increase their regulatory effort with respect to these companies not falling within the ambit of the carbon markets. Another key idea that could be also envisioned in India is to conserve the ecosystems that are storing the CO2. So technically speaking, we will never achieve to reduce, to eliminate emissions of all greenhouse gases. And ecosystem can play a role in storing the CO2. But it means that state authorities should enhance their conservation measures in setting aside more nature sanctuaries, more national parks, more conservation areas, in supporting extensive agriculture on the account that intensive agriculture releases more greenhouse gases. I'm facing a technical issue. So regarding the efforts that have to be done at state level, that encompass local transport, not shipping, not aviation, buildings, agriculture, small industries, and waste management. The waste management is releasing mostly methane rather than CO2. And instead of achieving by 2030 a 30% reduction, again, against the compared to 2050, at EU level, the aim is to achieve a reduction of 40%. So this is really significant in such a short time span to reduce by 40%. It's extremely challenging because there is no specific carbon market. It's really the state authorities, the regional authorities, or the municipalities that have really to rework regional, local transportation, and that requires significant investment. Also, that can be interesting for the Indian scholars and the Indian authorities, is given that we are in an union like India, the states here are vested with broad competences, is that Belgium is extremely wealthy, is extremely robust from an economic point of view. Bulgaria is poor. Bulgaria has old-fashioned industries. So one cannot require the Bulgarian authorities to achieve the same level of greenhouse gas reduction than the Belgian authorities because there is less resources. And that explains why at national level, the most robust states have to achieve a higher result, diminution by 47% in Belgium, but Germany even stronger economically, achieving a reduction of 50%, while Croatia, which is a country which is suffering from depopulation, from the youth is leaving the country. It's mostly a tourist-based economy today. The aim is achieving a 16% reduction. So that could be also a lesson for the Indian authorities to combine a state approach with a global union approach. Of course, this is a subsidiarity, so the state authorities are better placed to determine whether the traffic should be reduced, highway traffic. In the Netherlands, it's the speed limit is 100 kilometers. So when I'm driving to the Netherlands, in Belgium, I can get up to 120. I move to France, I can reach 130. In Germany, I can go up to 160, 180, 200 kilometers an hour, provided there is not too much traffic, it's not raining heavily. But in the Netherlands, everywhere it's maximum 100. But the lower the speed limits are, the less fuel consumption and the less greenhouse gas. When we reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. So many scientists and technicians propose the state authorities to diminish the speed limits on highways in cities, not only as a matter of safety, as a matter of economy for the social security, but also for the climate policy. But that must be decided either at regional level or at national level. One cannot envision a legislative act regarding this. And also a lesson for India or other countries in the region is the role played by ecosystems. So well-maintained ecosystem can play a key role in avoiding floodings. We've seen plenty of examples from Pakistan to Bangladesh, from Sri Lanka, that has been hit by very severe floodings. That of importance is to keep natural ecosystems, protected forests, but also in the farmlands, hedges, trees, to avoid major erosion due to heavy storms, heavy floodings. And this ecosystem can also play a key role in storing. So old-growth forests, marshlands, wetlands are known to be carbon sinks instead of carbon sources. So it's to make the nature an ally of our development goals, in other words. And so here again, the target has been increased up to the 10 million tons of CO2 equivalent should be removed by the ecosystem in the coming years. And that must be decided at national level. So the EU cannot decide that Wallonia or Flanders should protect extra wetlands, extra marshland instead of forest, or that Wallonia should protect more forest than wetlands. That's a national decision. But the framework is a global framework for the EU, that in light of the principle of subsidiarity, there must be fleshed out at national or regional level. So this picture I took in Northern Netherlands, this has been a rehabilitated, restored wetland under nature protection law. And this ecosystem is not only playing a key role in maintaining feeding station for migratory birds coming from Siberia, wintering in the Netherlands or migrating to Europe to reach Africa, to winter in Africa. But it's also playing a key role in removing the extra CO2 that cannot be captured by technical means. So again, if you look at my slides, and you can find them on my website, Trade versus Environmental, forward you the references to my articles, so you can delve into this subject matter. It's extremely complementary. So we are finding a genuine architecture composed of different instruments, but each of these instruments is adapted to the economic, technical, and scientific reality. So one of my colleagues, she's Flemish, wrote a chapter in famous textbooks on EU law, and she stressed on climate change policy that this has been the most ambitious, extensive, and cohesive package of climate change legislation anywhere in the world. So from an Asian point of view, if I was a decision maker, I would have a close look on what's going on in the process. And now I move to the component, the energy component of CEERA. So this was the communication of 2021, laying down the key vehicles to achieve climate neutrality by 2050. And the red thread is to get rid of a fuel-powered energy-based industry into a decarbonized industry. So the energy means for transport, for industry, must be electricity. Electricity produced mostly by renewables. And so many external factors explain the need to embrace a more ambitious approach. It's the solidarity among member states due to the COVID-19 pandemic. My country fared quite well because our economic structure is based on many small size industries, whereas the German economy, which is reckoning upon big industries, was fully hit. So Belgian economy succeeded in recovering quite quickly from the pandemics. But there was a real sense of solidarity among the nations of Europe due to the pandemic, and that led to the more significant borrowing of 750 billion euros to sustain the national economies that were suffering from the downturn related to the pandemics. The post-COVID recovery plan was Next Generation EU, so that was fueled by this borrowing on the internal market by the European Commission of the 750 billion. And part of this money has been invested at national level in promoting renewables, in promoting installations, isolations of buildings. So for instance, my university had an old 1970 building that was catastrophic as a matter of emissions. It was very costly as a matter of energy. I've been teaching in that building for 20 years. And thanks to a loan, to a subsidy of 800,000 euros, my university is in the process of renovating that building and making it fully energy efficient. And that was enabled thanks to this new next generation EU. The next generation from EU has been complemented by the RePower EU plans that was adopted at the end of 2022 after Ukraine was invaded by Russia in February 2022. And there is also this willingness to achieve energy neutrality, energy autonomy, thanks to the growth in renewables. So one can understand that there is a circle with carbon neutrality on the one hand, that entails energy transition, and that will support strategic autonomy. And in order to achieve this, we should reduce our dependency towards critical minerals and rare earths that are indispensable to achieve climate neutrality. And so, of course, that will lead to the electrification of entire parts of the economy. And it's a challenge for industry because industry is mostly fuel powered and gas powered, and means that from a technical point of view, the shift transition will take several years because the whole installation will have to be readjusted. A sharp increase of electricity produced from renewables, be it biomass, solar, wind, and hydro, the adaptation of the energy infrastructure, because, and that's a discussion we have aired on the radio, on TV every day, be it the German radio or the Belgian or the French-speaking or the Flemish-speaking Belgian radio, is how to deal with the absence of strong solar radiation in winter, where the solar energy process will be reduced, and how to offset the reduction in solar production thanks to wind production. So things are somewhat from a meteorological point of view unpredictable. And so the idea is to really create a common market among the countries, so that Belgium faces shortage of electricity. The electricity should be imported either from Denmark or from Germany. And conversely, when there is too little electricity being produced by the wind energy in Germany, then the electric market in Germany should be supplemented by electricity produced in. And so this is leading to the adaptation of the rising of ambitions with respect to three legal instruments: the Renewable Energy Directive, the Energy Efficiency Directive, and the Energy Performance of Buildings Directives. And so there is no energy taxation directive, because of the absence of competences of the EU in this field. But a sharp increase from 32% to 40% in the production of renewables into the energy mix, and a much more ambitious energy efficiency. So that's the new landscapes across Europe, and the number of windmills and solar energy fields will increase, because by 2040, 40% of the energy mix must come from renewables. And so we are really assisting a transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy. When it comes to building, also the objective is really to have all official but also private buildings that are not consuming fuels, and that are fully isolated, which is a challenge. So this the Catholic Church, where I go to the Mass on Sunday, from an energy point of view, is a quagmire, because it will be so costly to isolate that building. But nevertheless, there are ongoing improvements regarding the performance of buildings. And last, this is the energy efficiency, which is much more technical. And finally, there is really much on the plate. It's a bit like a good Indian dinner with a number of very small plates. And so the state authorities have to lay down year by year a plan, a program to integrate the different climate and energy components in order to achieve by 2050 climate neutrality. And so I would like to forward to you, Principal, or to your Chancellor, the relevant materials, because it could be really interesting materials to investigate. I imagine that Indian authorities do face rather similar challenges. In particular, the climate change risk is quite high in the region, with Mysuru patterns being somewhat disturbed in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for the profound and illuminating keynote address on the energy transition in the European Union. Now, I request Professor K.S. Suresh, Chief Executive, JSS Law College, to felicitate the Chief Guest. Thank you, sir. Now, we will be going for a tea break for the next 10-15 minutes. I request all the participants to assemble back. I request all the participants to assemble back after 5 minutes break. Thank you. I now invite Pranav Kumar Nair, Assistant Professor, to introduce our guest of honor.
A very good morning to all of you. I consider it a great privilege to introduce one of the most excellent faculty members of our times and a very distinguished professor, Professor Dr. CEERA Bhatt. Dr. Bhatt is a professor of law and co-director of Center for Environmental Law, Education, Research and Advocacy, CEERA, and a professor of the National Law School of India, University, Bengaluru. Sir completed his BCom from Mahajan First Grade College, Mysuru, LLB from JSS Law College, Mysuru, LLM and PhD from Department of Studies in Law, University of Mysuru. Some of his great achievements are: he was awarded the Young India Environmental Law Fellowship and served as an adjunct faculty at Golden Gate University, California, United States of America, during the fall of 2003. He is a Fulbright Nehru Fellow, 2010. Served as a visiting researcher at the Georgetown University Law Center, Washington, D.C., during August to December 2010. Sir was also a Linnaeus Palm Academic Exchange Fellow at the Royal Institute of Technology, Stockholm, Sweden, in 2012 to 2013. Sir was also editor of Care Law Journal in 2005 and 2006. Sir's areas of interest are law of contracts, environmental law, constitutional law, energy law, and right to information. Among many, a few of his notable publications include Environmental Law for Law Practitioners, Law Relating to Business Contracts in India, Natural Resources Conservation Law, and the Right to Information. Sir, it's a pleasure to welcome you to this session. Kindly take the session.
Okay, good afternoon to all of you. Uh, Very quickly, I don't see much energy in an energy law conference. So get some energy. It's important that we discuss about this because I believe there are three emerging sunrise sectors in law. First is, of course, maritime law, which is emerging as a sunrise sector for legal practice. Second is technology and law with AI, privacy, so on and so forth. So that's also an emerging and a sunrise sector. The conference of today, energy law, is also an upcoming sunrise sector. It's a very bright sector in case you're looking for legal practice. Okay. So I thought this would be important so that you start thinking whether you need to read about energy law, you need to know about it, and whether you need to practice it. Now, is there an energy law in India? This is a question for you. I won't answer. Do we know about anything called energy law in India? We'll come to you and India a bit later. But let's start with what you know. It's like assessing the pre-knowledge to a conference. Do we have an energy law? Say yes, no, don't know. Someone said. The Electricity Act. The Electricity Act. Do you know the distinction between energy and electricity? Electricity is different. Of course, it is generated from energy. But energy is more broader and wider than electricity. Yeah? Okay. But please note, we have a law called Energy Conservation Act. There is one law which at least has the word energy. Okay. Now, just to tell you why this law is important, Professor Nicholas was making a very brilliant and very expert presentation on CBAM, that is the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism in EU. Interestingly, friends, under the Energy Conservation Act, today we have something called the CAF guidelines, CAFE. So, name German car makers in India quickly. I'll make you the link between India and EU. Volkswagen, Mercedes, BMW, the last one, Audi, very good. Now, all these German cars, with all due respect to these cars, they're very luxury cars, they're very good cars. But in India, we always have this, consumeristic mechanism of asking, "Ye gaadi kitna deta hai?" Okay, that's why we prefer Maruti. Why? Because they're fuel efficient. The German cars, unfortunately, are not. So we have a law and a guideline called CAFE guideline, which now insists that all these cars must be energy efficient, because we want to lower our dependency on fossil fuel and oil. And India imports nearly 95% of our oil requirement. We import, we don't have oil reserves. So we bring it from different other countries. We'll talk about that in a little while. But we want all these automobiles to be energy efficient. So they must actually look at improving their fuel efficiency through these guidelines, right? So that is called the Energy Conservation Act. Now, why I say this is because EU has carbon CBAM, as we call it. India has decided to bring in CAP guidelines. So we actually learned from EU quite a bit. EU has been a great legal comparative law for India. For example, when EU brought the GDPR, India started getting a law on privacy. So we did not go by GDPR. GDPR is too strict. Unfortunately, the Indians, as comparative law researchers, find EU to be far more stricter with its regulation. And I'm sure EU member nations also find EU guidelines stricter. And we try to modernize it, we try to regulate it, right? So EU has been a front runner in regulation, including AI. Very recently, EU passed an AI law. India is now debating about the same. But India has options. So we look at EU, we look at US, and we look at different other countries, and we decide what is best in our interest. And that's why the laws are made in similar lines. Now, coming to the topic of today, friends, energy. Friends, there are three aspects of energy that I would like to discuss with you. Okay? First, the science of energy. Now, why is the science relevant? Is because you don't know which energy is good and can we produce it. I think that's a challenge. For example, hydrogen. The science of hydrogen is still not very clear, whether we want green hydrogen or gray hydrogen. At least not hydrogen is going to be the next biggest energy contributor, like Abhijit was mentioning in his preliminary remark. But there is a science regarding the same. The science is important because unless you know the science of it, whether it's efficient or not, whether we can produce or not. For example, China is going to capture sun, not from solar. They're going to capture sun and generate energy. That's what Chinese are doing right now. Okay. So the science of energy is very, very critical. I'll talk about it in a little while, but that's the first part that we need to understand. And in this, to be honest, India and EU can cooperate a lot. And this is what is known as green innovation and R&D, that India and Europe must come together for the betterment of the world, right? And the free trade agreement that India and Europe is trying to sign actually gives a lot of impetus to R&D, innovation and science. Can we have innovative science? Can we make it affordable science? And I think that is very important in terms of India and EU. The second part of energy is the cost benefit analysis. Now you must know that in India, electricity or energy is all dependent upon its cost. A lot of political parties make promises of giving you free electricity and they come to power just based on that promise. So you don't require just energy, you require that energy at a affordable cost. Now, for example, if the cost of petrol or diesel goes by more than 100 rupees, naturally there's going to be chaos and there can be riot in India because cost is very, very important. So between cost and benefit, right? Like Professor Nicholas was talking about the benefits of a greener climate. Now we know that we need renewable energy, but please note renewable energy is good for the climate, but it is good for the better countries that are already developed. We are still developing, right? Now the cost benefit analysis in India is a very prominent factor for us to invest in renewable energy. We understand that we must have our climate goals. Rather, India has very ambitious climate goals. We do understand what is good for the climate and earth in a longer sense. But every energy has a cost benefit analysis. For today, why are we still dependent on fossil fuel? Because fossil fuel is cheaper than renewable. So the cost benefit analysis will be a long-term analysis in the energy sector. I will give you some more examples of it later on. The third and the most important part, I think from where we should start the EU-India kind of a debate, is the politics of energy. Now, friends, why was World War I fought? Any idea? You don't remember. It's not your generation. Why was World War II fought? You don't remember, but you remember that gentleman. I can call him one. Okay. Because World War I does not have a name, World War II has a name. Friends, you will be surprised to know we are right now in a World War III situation on energy. Energy war is real. Are you surprised? Mysuru is down, there is war, there is energy. Why did Donald Trump invade Venezuela? Any idea? Why is Russia invading Ukraine? Why did the United States invade Iraq? Friends, I think today the so-called war on energy is real. The so-called war on energy is real. If India and EU have come together, it is because China is dominating 90% of critical minerals. We don't want Chinese dominance overseas. The countries are actually getting into free trade agreement. You think there's something called free trade? Never trade is free. Trade is always commercial. But this name called free is just attributable because I think EU for a lot of years has been looking at West. Now they're looking east. East means not Russia. They are afraid of Russia because they thought Russia was a very good partner for them. They relied on Russia to give them natural gas. And now because Russia is waging war in Ukraine and Ukraine seems to be part of EU, the European Union is inevitably looking at some other nations because there's a doctrine called the Dawn Road Doctrine. Do you know what this doctrine is? Anyone who gives me the right answer gets a prize, which I have not got. Do you read newspapers? Good. You need law journalism. There is something called the Monroe Doctrine, which is an American doctrine. Today we have a president of the United States who comes up with a doctrine called the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine is a doctrine in which Donald Trump wants to dominate his hemisphere. And he does not believe the Europeans are their allies. Even NATO, he's trying to create a different kind of a mindset of his own. So Monroe Doctrine has created a threat to the world. Right? And the world is actually at war to secure its own energy resources. For example, what's the politics of energy trade? When Russia invaded Ukraine, please note this is something that is there. Mr. Jaishankar, the External Affairs Minister in a conference in Europe, was asked this, why do you continue to buy Russian oil? When Russia is invading into another nation, which is unethical, illegal, as per UN Charter, international law, there is no international law existing right now. There is only one law called Trump law. Right? So I don't think multilateralism exists today. And that's why we are going to bilateralism. Multilateralism is under failure, it's diluting. The jurisprudence of UN is out. It is just bilateralism that is working. WTO is out. Bilateral investment treaties are in. Anyway, the point is this, friends, that when Mr. Jaishankar was asked this question, should India buy the dirty Russian oil? Because when India buys Russian oil, Russia gets funded and they can fund the war in Ukraine. But please note, here is what the world does not know. That today, every country has to ensure its own energy security. What is energy security in India as against EU? Because please note, EU has its own politics. EU has to deal with its own border issues. So energy is the reason why you have political strategies and political securities. Today in India, please note, we are the third largest energy consumers of the world, thanks to the fantastic population that we have. Third largest. Yet, there are so many villages in India that have not been electrified. Okay. Now we are sitting in a London setup, we are talking of energy and electricity, but let me tell you, to be honest, we don't consume as much of energy as an average American does or as an average European does, though we are the largest country. Our energy consumption per capita is the 10th largest in the world, though we are the third largest country. So you will notice that why we said we want to buy Russian oil, because Europe's problem is not the world's problem. This is what Mr. Jaishankar said. I'm asking. He said Europe's problem is not the India's problem. It's not the world's problem. We have to look at our own security, right? Now, do you know if India goes to war just on, say, crude oil? If India goes to war, 90% of our crude oil gets imported, right? How many days do you think you can run your two-wheelers and four-wheelers? You're getting the question? No. Confused? How many days do you think we can run our two-wheelers and four-wheelers? Friends, please note, India has developed two strategic reserves for crude oil. One in Visakhapatnam, the other in Guwahati. So we have a strategic policy of fossil fuel, wherein Europe also has it. We store fossil fuel. And the average time China has around 480 days of storage. India has around 370 days of storage. So if we go to war and all our fuel supplies are closed, 90% of fossil fuel, the petrol, diesel, everything comes from that. If India borders is shut, we can run this country only for 370 years. That is the reserve strategic crude oil reserve policy has been created. So we don't have great neighbors. We had some, but the regime change happened. Right? We thought Bangladesh is a good neighbor. Now Bangladesh is not playing ICC tournament. First we excluded Pakistan, then Bangladesh, next Sri Lanka, Nepal. We have great neighbors, so we have to secure our own future. This is what energy security is. Right? So every country has the sovereign right, if I can say so, to draft its own energy security policy. And this is what Mr. Jaishankar said. We have to decide our own future. Right? We have a young population, we have an emerging population, we have jobs, we have growth, we are rather the fastest growing economy in the world, we have a lot of energy demand, and we will determine what our security policies are. So the politics of energy, friends, you will be surprised to know if you actually delve deep into it. It's not something that we lawyers must always read, but it's good to read. Have you heard about a concept called petrodollar? No, except looking at me or say yes or no. Come expression. ಕೇಳಿಲ್ವಾ ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾತಾಡ್ಬೇಕು ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾ ಒಳ್ಳೆಯವ್ರನ್ನ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾ ಯಾವುದು So petrodollar, friends, do you know why the Americans are so worried about the energy market? Why do they want to dominate the fossil fuel market? It is because, friends, at one point of time, the Americans went to the Saudis. They said, if oil is going to be sold in the world, please note the currency in which fossil fuel is going to be sold should be only dollars. That is what is the concept of a petrodollar. If you think dollar is going up, it is because of only this reason that the Americans captured the fossil fuel market and said, fossil fuel sold, it must be paid only in dollars. That's why dollar is so high in that. Don't think that it is because America is great and make it great again. So there is politics in fossil fuel. They knew fossil fuel was the future of the globe. And they said, let's make only dollar as the currency. And you know what is the politics over here? The politics is BRIC nations. You know what is BRICS? What is it? Brazil, Russia, China, India, and South Africa. BRICS nation is trying to bring another currency like the euro. The euro currency, unfortunately, is not being able to dominate in the energy market. So we have said we've come up with a currency called unit, which will be a competitor to the dollar. And in case we are buying fossil fuel, we will pay in unit. Now, Donald Trump knows this. He says, if BRICS come up with their own currency, I will impose 100% tax. This is the politics of energy. This is the politics. And there are so many such politics of energy. For example, if you talk about the politics of energy, let me target Paris Agreement. Professor Nicholas said, yes, we have to go for renewable energy. We have to reduce our carbon footprint. Right? Energy, for example, does it contribute to CO2 emissions? Does it? How? Okay, you are getting electricity. Where are you getting it? Burning coal. ಈಗ ಸದ್ಯಕ್ಕೆ ಕರ್ನಾಟಕಕ್ಕೆ ಎಲೆಕ್ಟ್ರಿಸಿಟಿ ಈಗ ಬರ್ತಾ ಇದೆ. ನಿಮ್ಮ ಎಲೆಕ್ಟ್ರಿಸಿಟಿ ಈಗ ಬರ್ತಾ ಇದೆ. ಶರಾವತಿ. Okay, please note. Do you know from where your electricity? So you are getting electricity from Chamundeshwari electricity company. Okay. These people, that is the distribution companies, have to get from generating. Now, in Karnataka, luckily we have hydropower, thanks to Mysuru, but we have a coal-based thermal power station as well. So, coal amounts to nearly 60% of the energy and electricity requirements in India. Coal. We burn coal, from that we get electricity. Right? Now, the point is this, friends. Every distributing company today in India has an obligation called Renewable Purchase Obligation, RPOs, in which 20 to 23% of the energy they must get from renewables. Name the renewables. Solar, hydro, geothermal, wind. Excellent. We must at least get 23% from renewable sources so that renewable companies also get business. This is called RPO, Renewable Purchase Obligation. It's a law. Now the point is this, friends. The Paris Agreement has forced us to build our renewable energy. Now, why do I say force? Because it's an agreement. We have ratified it. We have given what is known as nationally determined contribution. Do you know what is our declaration under the nationally determined contribution under Paris Agreement? We have said by 2030, 500 gigawatts of electricity will come from renewable energy. By 2030, we have already reached 200 gigawatts of renewable energy, out of which 100 gigawatts is coming from solar alone. That is the investment that we are doing because we believe climate is an important obligation. Right? We think European Union thinks. But what does Mr. Trump think? One of the biggest emitters of CO2 is the United States. And one of the biggest contributors of all kinds of emissions is the Russian war, which is going on for the last 2 years. So Donald Trump has walked away from Paris Agreement. He has threatened to walk away from 66 other international agreements as well. This is the politics of Paris Agreement. Now, remember, why should a country which is not so very developed, like India, where there is so much of pressure, why should we invest on renewable energy? Why should we, force our distributing companies to go for solar? Right? So these are the challenges of the Paris Agreement. While India, being a responsible international member, continues to do it, there are so many other organizations that have failed to implement Paris Agreement. So more is at risk, especially when it comes to renewable energy. Now, one of the aspects of renewable energy, please note, friends, is that renewable energy is not very stable. For example, solar. Please note when the solar energy gets generated. During peak summer season. That's why we have most of the solar parks in Rajasthan and in the Ran of Kutch. Right? Unless you develop what is known as the battery storage systems, unless solar energy can be stored and then given in the night, you cannot succeed in renewable energy. So there are challenges. And that's what has India said. Please note, India has said, so European Union wants to go net zero by 2050. India has said we will go net zero only by 2070. Whereas European Union wants decarbonization, we have said low carbonization. We can't do decarbonization. We have agreed. That's not our market. We cannot completely go away or shy away from fossil fuel. We'll have to be dependent upon fossil fuel. We have no other argument. So these are the comparative challenges between EU and India. Right? Now, here is what we must all know, friends. That energy is a very important aspect of your life. Okay? It's a very important aspect. Can you repeat that? Say yes, no. Is it a fundamental right? A student's constitutional. You said you can't leave. I'm asking, is it a fundamental?
Yes, Article 21, right to energy is a fundamental.
Right to access energy is a fundamental. Not right to. There's a difference. So Supreme Court has already said this. You're not being taught, that's all. Because we have talked about other things already. But the Supreme Court and Allahabad High Court have already declared right to access energy is a fundamental right. Why do you think this should be? In India, why do you think it should be a fundamental right?
More things related to the other fundamental.
Excellent. Like for example?
For example, Article 19, we have to practice some kind of profession when it is for energy.
Excellent. She's saying, how is energy linked to your other fundamental rights? You have to do speech and expression. This will work only if there is energy. You know how energy is connected to all your other fundamental rights. Without energy, you cannot probably have any kind of digital rights as well. Energy is so critical, energy is so important. Now, if this is a right, what is the obligation of the government? Because there is a right duty correlative, right? So the government has to give you this energy. Now, does India have a policy to give energy for all? For example, we have a concept, please note it down. If you think you want to read more about it, we have a concept called universal service. Universal service. Is energy part of what is known as the concept of a universal service obligation? If you read the Electricity Act, Abhijit was talking about Electricity Act of 2003. Abhijit, please read. There is a provision which says electricity is part of the universal service obligation of the state. Which means it's part of your inalienable right. Every citizen, irrespective of his nature, commercial, social, or otherwise, must have rights to that energy. Equally, equality, equity, whatever you want to use it, you can use it only. So, as urban ruralites, we have the same energy right as a rural or any other tribal or indigenous community. The state has this universal obligation to ensure everyone enjoys energy. Now, the point is here, friends, When we talk about energy and you talk about the cost benefit analysis in India, friends, please know the government has an obligation to give you affordable energy. Now, what do you mean by affordable energy? Renewable energy can be very expensive at the beginning stages. For example, wind energy. The investment is huge, the returns are slow, right? So in India, while we say everyone should have access to energy, it is the cost of energy. What's your average electricity bill? You must be saying, I don't pay it. But after this session, at least go and see what is the average electricity bill. What does the government say? What bhagya is there for electricity in Karnataka? Some bhagya is there. I knew some Anna bhagya, that bhagya, some yojana. Now, why is this? Because we believe that electricity is an obligation of the state. Now, please note, friends, we cannot just say right to access energy in India. The biggest challenge is two parts: safe and clean energy. Now, have you seen reports of deaths due to electrocution? Safe energy is a challenge. Have you seen elephants dying because of electrocution in some of the Western Ghats? Safe energy is a challenge. Clean energy is also a challenge. Affordable energy is also a challenge. So in India, friends, if you look at it, the government has created a policy where we have what is known as the energy mix policy. We are open to all kinds of energy. Renewable energy, non-conventional, conventional, and non-renewable energies as well. So this is an open policy right now. We are open to all because the science is not very clear. We have to be clear with science. For example, the world is saying, please phase out coal. But why should we phase out? Coal reserves are the only reserves that we have. We don't have any other reserves. We are able to find if we have good lithium, we have good thorium, uranium. So we are trying to look at what is available in India should actually meet the needs of our generation. Coal is cheap in India, thermal energy is the cheapest in India. So we are relying on coal. Though we are saying that we will phase it out, but our reliance is there because it's a cost benefit analysis. Now let me tell you one interesting factor of the cost benefit analysis. What is not spoken today is something that I'll speak as the last, and I'll conclude in another thing. Friends, the politics, the science, and the cost benefit analysis, three parts I do. We can go to other sectors, but let me tell you the most important sector that is relevant for India. And that sector is nuclear energy. Just 2 weeks back, friends, the government of India in the parliament presented a bill on nuclear energy. Name the bill. I will give you a gift. Now name the bill. You are absolutely right. No. I think you must have a newspaper reading session in JSS Law College. You know that I am a student of this college, right? When I was a student, I used to never read. But now I can stand here and preach now. When I was a student, I was outside the college, less inside. Anyway, the point is this, friends, it's called the Shanti Bill. Okay, we have a new law passed by the parliament on nuclear energy. Interestingly, France and India have a lot of cooperation. Of course, EU member nations, we can talk about EU, but let me just specifically speak about France. India and France have a very interesting alliance called the Solar Alliance. The International Solar Alliance. We are the two founding members, India and France, and this is the only international alliance in which the headquarters is in India. Otherwise, most of the treaties and alliance, the headquarters are in Europe or in some other country. But this Solar Alliance, it doesn't go down. The point is this, friends, in France, at one point of time, because of the lack of science and the cost benefit analysis, France decided to shut down all its nuclear energy plants. Why? Because there was a perception that nuclear energy is bad. Why is it bad? Radiation, leakage, disasters. It can wipe out the human race. So I think France and a lot of EU member nations, including the United Kingdom, shut down its nuclear plant. But do you know what happened after 2023? The UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is UNFCCC, has declared nuclear energy as clean energy. So right now, friends, India and EU are reopening nuclear plants. We are reinvesting in nuclear. And that's why in India, what we are saying is we will increase the nuclear energy percentage from 3% currently to at least 10%. So we are investing in nuclear energy because apart from coal, if there is some energy or electricity that can give you grid stability, because please note, renewable energy cannot go to a steam power plant. Renewable energy cannot be used in a cement plant. Renewable energy can be used only in a house and small appliances. Renewable energy does not have that grid or the power stability that is required. So you have to depend upon coal. Apart from coal, if there is any other energy that can give heavy industry that kind of energy and power that is required, is only nuclear energy. India, interestingly, has resources. See, there is something called in energy, the raw material. Raw material is then used into electricity. Correct. So you have to see whether your resources are there. And nuclear energy is the next big issue in India. We are investing in it because we think it is clean. We are investing in it because we think it is safe. And the world has now acknowledged the same, that nuclear energy can be safe. Now let me close by saying this. See, today the science, coming to the first part, science, cost management analysis and politics. The science of nuclear energy is so interesting. There is so much research. And that's why private companies are actually looking into this. You know how nuclear energy, earlier we had a challenge of disposing radioactive waste. Correct? Maybe some of you know. The real problem and challenge is not because of disasters. Naturally, radiation disasters are a challenge. But nuclear energy also generates what is known as radioactive waste. Disposing of this waste is a real problem. It can be a problem for the environment and a problem for the entire community. So what they used to do, most of them would dump it into the sea. And you think ocean pollution, contamination happens. But the science of nuclear energy now is such that the same fuel that is a radioactive waste is now called as spent fuel. Spent fuel. And this fuel again can be used for energy. So please note today, friends, we have a concept called waste to energy plants. India is investing a lot on waste to energy plants. From nuclear waste, we are trying to make energy. From bio waste or biomass waste, we are trying to make energy. From your liquid waste, sewage waste, we are trying to convert into energy. From your municipal waste, we are trying to convert into energy. So this waste to energy has become the new benchmark of renewable energy, of clean energy. And nuclear energy seems to be the future right now, especially if you're talking of affordability and if you're talking about the science of energy that is there. So this is an interesting proposition for India and EU to come together. I think India and EU have so many things in common. And I think we have to work together to make a world a more peaceful environment, but an environment in which there is universal energy for all. I think that is a very critical approach that one must take, right? It is not based on one who has the power to buy energy should only have access to the same. And private players in India have entered into the energy market, and that's where I feel that you guys as lawyers and law students must specialize in energy law. This is a potentially great area of practice. There are a lot of disputes in energy that are arising, and disputes are good news for us. Right? More the disputes, better the market for all of us. So please try to specialize in this area. See if you can develop your interests in this particular area. There are a lot of cases that are coming before the Supreme Court on energy disputes. There is a regulator called CERC, Central Electricity Regulatory Commission, and there are several such bodies that deal with energy. But I think more of those information when we come back to a certificate course to be offered at JSS Law College. With this, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. We would request students to kindly engage with the resource person and ask questions if you have any. If anybody has any questions.
Because you didn't have to explain the ways in which the national authorities cooperate and the achieve with of the department of increasing the regulatory powers and the energy needs, the nature of the service, and whether it's a step-by-step approach or whether there is a stable objectives, and how does it work with the national navigation of powers.
I think Professor Nicholas wants to understand the Indian situation. I think that's very valid in terms of doing a comparative law analysis. Friends, as you see, electricity in India under the Constitution of India falls under the concurrent list. So both center and state can manage electricity. Now there are certain kinds of energy that are there in the central government, certain kinds of energies that are falling in the state government. For example, fossil fuel, petroleum. Now, when you talk about energy, please note there are a couple of things. One is exploration. For example, natural gas, we don't know how much of natural gas we have. Exploration policy. So we hire companies to find out what kind of energy source or mix is there. Exploration. Second, we have a policy called exploitation, where we say one, you can extract. So government will monitor, there is a royalty that has to be paid. Government will decide to import, export, who is to be sold, privatization, so on and so on. So that's one regulatory part of the story. Third, and most importantly, I think privatization is encouraged. Even under the Electricity Act, we don't mind privatization because I think what in UK we have understood is that the government has limitations of getting money, investment and money. So we encourage private place. Now, we have a special ministry for renewable energy, right? And under this ministry, you have to apply for a license to generate electricity. You know why? Because then you have to sell it through a grid which is maintained by the government. So you have a generation, you have a distribution and transmission, then you have consumption. So this is the energy chain. So privatization is allowed. And that's why in India, a lot of private renewable companies have it registered. They're investing a lot in all the kinds of energies that are required in the renewable form. Hydrogen is something that India is betting upon, and a lot of companies are investing in the same part, but we are not very sure, I think, the science between green and green. Because right now, the cost of hydrogen is almost $5 per kg. And unless it is brought down to $2.5, it may not be feasible to be accepted in India. Because as I told you in India, the cost benefit analysis always is something that the government is very keen to know when they buy electricity. Usually, even renewable energy companies have to take part in an auction, and only from a competitive bidding process, the electricity is bought and then given to consumers. So we have gone into all forms of renewable energy sources, but wind energy, especially offshore, India has invested in this. That is because of two reasons. One is on the Bay of Bengal, our sea is very rough. It is something that attracts a lot of cyclones during the monsoon season. The land and the grid stabilities are a huge challenge. The platforms on an experimental basis are failed. Right now, in the Indian Ocean, we are thinking of coming up with wind energy, but that would probably take some time. But it's completely something that India has done through the public-private participation movement. So the government only gives license. They invest in R&D, but the generation usually is privatized.
I just wanted to know your opinion. First of all, wonderful session as usual. So this is oneness. I just borrowed the idea from you where you were talking about energy out of waste, which is I think picking up at Chennai. And the other side, contrast, non-electrified states, use of gobar gas and use of chulas. So I just want your comments or opinion on this.
So, Vani, when you say clean energy, I think anything clean in the environment is a shifting goalpost. See, at one point of time, gobar gas was a thing considered as renewable energy and which we use. But the problem of the world in climate change is not only CO2. The problem of the world is also methane. Right? So with methane emissions increasing, and India, unfortunately, with the largest cattle population in the world, we have refused to sign an international treaty called the Methane Pact, where India is supposed to sign it and reduce its methane emission, but we don't want to touch the agri sector right now. In the EU treaty also, we have left the agri sector. We have said steel, cement, all can come, but agri and food cannot, because that is where maybe 50% of our population is still involved in the sea. So we said because of methane emission, gobar gas cannot succeed. We have to reduce its dependence. Now, if you go to the conventional forms, I don't know if you knew this, burning of wood was a major source of energy in kitchens and households. Burning of wood. But again, burning of wood is not good for the climate. And hence we have given LPG connections to every household. Second, we used to use kerosene. I'm talking of my generation. The generation does not know the spelling of this. We used to stand in queue, collect kerosene, and then come home, give it to our mom, and chalak it. This generation now knows only digital apps. So the point is, kerosene again, in terms of the emissions from the burning of kerosene are so high, so damaging to the environment that we have said that is not to be encouraged for use as well. Professor was talking about maritime, aviation, fuel. Now, aviation and maritime fuel in the contemporary context are actually highly polluting. But again, slowly by 2019, Peace Note Paris was agreed in 2014, 2015. But we took 2019 to change the aviation and the maritime sector. Right now, we are asking the maritime sector, the International Maritime Organization has asked the fuel to come into low sulfur, including the aviation. We're trying to do with, trying to blend what we call as biofuels. Have you heard of something called jetropar? We can actually generate fuel from certain kinds of leaves and seeds. So biofuel is the next thing. For example, I don't know if you know ethanol. What of ethanol? Brazil blends ethanol 20%. We are not being able to blend ethanol because the Indian sugar cane that generates ethanol, or Indian barley or any other that brings ethanol, the percentage of emission is too high. The carbon emission is too high, so we are not allowing that to happen right now. Brazil sugar, that is okay, but Indian sugar cane and other crops that generate ethanol are not very good. So I think while it is one good thing to use the raw material, but I think the emission standards of the raw material and its use are something of a concern. That's why we are shifting to different other concepts as well. For example, biomass. You can get all the leaves in JSS Law College and burn. Maybe you can have one day, but those can actually generate higher emissions than anything else. So I think it's about that cost benefit analysis that has to be taken into consideration. Benefit of the environment always at the highest stage. Cost is something that we have to take into consideration. I like the energy, please.
Hello, sir. My question is regarding green patents. So one of the biggest hurdles to developing countries to adapt these green initiatives is
This is of the past. Be happy that India is doing indigenization of all green innovations that are required. We were so dependent. We were looking at the Kyoto Protocol. We were looking at the clean development mechanism. We were looking at patent waiver. I don't know if you heard about what patent waiver is. Go to TRIPS, go to WTO, you will understand what that means. During COVID-19, we were discussing all of this. But in the last couple of years, let me assure you, especially in renewable energies, India has filed the highest number of patents. So we are not dependent on any other nation for R&D, especially in renewable energies. For example, India in 2021 was importing 80% of its solar panels from China. Did you know this? Yeah. Again, China has a monopoly on solar technology. The high voltage solar panels that are used, China even now has domination. But India, under the Prime Minister's scheme called Atmanirbhar Bharat, right? Under a scheme in which you were given incentive. This is called Product Incentive Scheme, PLI. Please refer to that. Wonderful. In the last 4 years, 60% of solar panels are made in right? So that is how India has been investing in R&D. At least not when it's made in India, it's cheaper. You get the technology to be made for the world. Because please know, like in generic medicines, India is actually now exporting the technology to Europe, especially to least developed nations, LDCs.
Hello, sir. Sir, my question is regarding the evolution of electric vehicles in India. We see government is providing various schemes such as FAME and also no toll in highways. And we also see a lot of EVs coming up on the road as well. But my question is, what about the disposal of batteries, especially lead acid and lithium?
Excellent point. No problem. See, there is nothing called green that is actually green. There is always a small challenge in everything that is done, right? And with EVs, I think the batteries disposal is a major challenge. But please note, India has already implemented a concept taken from Germany. Again, as I told you, how EU influences, it does influences and gives you a lot of ideas. We have implemented a concept called extended producers responsibility, EPR, which means these companies have to take the batteries themselves back. They will recycle, reuse, or make some kind of mechanism from the same. So I think there is a law that is working on these challenges. And I think one of the things is technology is also getting improved on the same level. So I think with lithium batteries, now the shelf life is increasing. You can recycle and reuse it, which is a great news. And I think we are definitely not going to dump it into third world countries, like some of the other countries have done. I think India is a very responsible state in terms of technology and its approaches. And with EVs, we have already implemented extended producers response.
Thank you. Thank you, sir, for that insightful session, which covered India's energy autonomy while striving for safe, affordable, and clean energy. Now, I call upon our principal, Dr. N. Manishri ma'am, to felicitate Professor Dr. Sairam sir. I invite Mr. Ashray Chakraborty, Assistant Professor, to introduce the resource person for our virtual session.
Good afternoon, everyone. Now I would like to introduce our resource person for the last technical session. That is Dr. Sanchita Tiwari. Is an assistant professor at the National Law University of Study and Research in Law, NLU, in Ranchi. She obtained her PhD degree from NUSRL, Ranchi, and holds LLM degree in corporate law from National Law University, Jodhpur. She earned her BA LLB from MS Ramaiah College of Law, Bengaluru. Dr. Tiwari has over a decade of experience in teaching and research. With prior academic engagements in National Law University, Orissa, her research and publications primarily focus on the insolvency and bankruptcy code, business law, and intersection of international trade and child rights. She authored and contributed to several book chapters and peer-reviewed journals, including works on timelines under the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, fair and equitable treatment of creditors, and challenges of globalization on the children's rights. She has presented research papers at various national and international conferences, including those organized by the Insolvency Law Academy, UNCITRAL, RGNUL Punjab, NMIMS School of Law, and International Academic Forum in Turkey. She has also delivered lectures and served as panelist resource person on issues ranging from governance reforms, business law to intellectual property rights and gender justice. Dr. Tiwari is actively associated with academic centers at NUSRL, including serving as a faculty convener for Center of Excellence in Insolvency Law and contributing to the Center of Business Law. On behalf of JSS Law College and Center for Environmental Law, Education, Research and Advocacy, CEERA, National Law University, Bangalore. I wholeheartedly welcome you, madam, to this session. We look forward for an interesting and engaging session for you. The session is yours, madam.
Namaskar, honorable chairs, distinguished delegates, esteemed colleagues, and my dear friends. It is a privilege to address this August gathering on the subject of profound contemporary relevance, India-European Union Energy Partnership under FTAs and BITs, focusing on its evolution, significance, and legal framework, with special emphasis on renewable energy, climate commitments, sustainable development, and the future of energy governance and regulatory cooperation. As already a lot has been spoken on the topic of energy, the concluding remarks would be that nature provides a free lunch, but only if we control our appetites. If we look into the world today, it stands at a very critical inflection point. Climate change, geopolitical realignments, and technological transformations have made global cooperation both imperative and complex. In this context, the strategic partnership between India and the European Union serves as a compelling model of collaboration between two pluralistic and large-scale polities pursuing shared values, economic modernization, and sustainable development. Now, when we look into the India-EU relations, we obviously know it did not emerge overnight. It has evolved through incremental engagements, from cautious engagement to strategic partnership. Coming to the early foundations from 1950s to 1990s, that is the post-World War II, Europe undertook a historic project of integration. The European Community, later known by the name of European Union, pursued economic integration as a pathway to peace and prosperity. India, newly independent, pursued the non-alignment and the state-led economic development. Initial interactions were limited, rooted in trade and diplomatic exchanges. The end of the Cold War, when we are talking about the globalization and the economic liberalization in India, from the 1990s to 2000s, it has created a very conducive condition for deeper engagement. The first significant policy articulation came with the India-EU joint political statement in the year 1994, which actually highlighted the shared democratic values and the development cooperation. India-EU trade and cooperation agreement, it actually marked an early effort to institutionalize the engagement. And by the early 2000s, the dialogues expanded into science and technology, civil aviation, which again, as of now, it is developing into maritime, and also at that point of time, education. From 2004 onwards, if we look into, a very watershed moment occurred when India and the European Union elevated their ties to a strategic partnership. Now, this was again very formalized high-level political dialogue, and which actually created institutional mechanisms across multiple domains. Summits were actually held annually. Ministerial dialogues on trade, climate, energy, science, and technology were there. Working groups were there on counterterrorism, cybersecurity, and sustainable development. Now, when we look into this institutional architecture, this has allowed both the sides, EU and India, to coordinate policies, which we called as the cooperation. And that is why on the topic of India-EU cooperation, that is what I have taken. So it actually jointly responded to the global challenges and aligned the strategies on shared priorities. Now, in the recent years, what we find is that the partnership has moved beyond the traditional themes to address the 21st century imperatives. The transition to clean energy, as Sairam sir has already given a very knowledge-enriching session on clean energy, the digital transformation that has taken place, the climate governance and the net zero trajectories that we talk about, and the supply chain resilience. Now, most of us have heard about the nationally determined contributions. So one significant area is the increasing alignment between India's NDCs and the Paris Agreement and the EU's Green Deal objectives. So when we are talking about the India-EU partnership, it is obviously significant on multiple counts. For example, the geostrategic areas, the economic areas, the environmental areas, and obviously the normative ones. Looking into the geostrategic significance, India and EU has shared a very has a rule-based order, multilateralism, and democratic norms. So that cooperation reinforces the defense and the security cooperation in the Indo-Pacific region, especially coordination on the maritime security, anti-piracy, and cyber governance. So synergies we can talk about in the multilateral forums, such as the G20, the United States, and the World Trade Organization. Coming to the economic significance, obviously the EU remains one of the India's largest trading partners and investors. Bilateral trade has grown substantially, spanning goods and services. The free trade agreement negotiations, which we called as the FTAs, have obviously faced challenges. Both the sides recognize the potential gains. So the low gains we could talk about in terms of lower tariffs, non-tariff barriers, regulatory convergence for ease of doing business. That even in India, we could see the easy entry and the easy exit that has evolved over the last 5 to 10 years. The enhanced investment flows in the strategic sectors like clean energy and technology. Perhaps the most compelling contemporary dimension of cooperation also lies in the climate and the sustainability, which we are taking it as a trend in the law subjects. Now, India and EU represent two of the world's largest economies, and critical energy consumers and producers are their stakeholders in the climate stabilization we are talking about. Now, their collaboration on renewable energy, energy efficiency, technology transfer, and climate finance, this again holds a very imperative stake in both the economies, that is the climate finance. So this is critical for the global decarbonization pathways. So the normative significance that I was talking about is nothing but that both the partners are proponents of sustainable development, inclusive growth, and the right-based approaches to governance. Their joint statements, principles of equity, just transition, social inclusion, and the resilience. So now that we have understood what is the cooperation, what is the significance, let us move forward to the legal framework of the India-EU cooperation. It is actually grounded in the institutional frameworks, as we already know that these frameworks provide a stability and accountability for the joint initiatives. So memorandum of understandings have been there in the specific sectors. Regular dialogues at the ministerial and the official levels are there. The layered frameworks that we are talking about, it is nothing but allowing flexibility while ensuring continuity. Also, taking the FTAs, which again remains to be finalized, several sectoral agreements and frameworks govern the economic cooperation. So we are talking about the bilateral investment agreements that provide a safeguard for the investors, mutual recognition agreements in standards and the conformity agreements, and the sectoral dialogues, which I have already talked about, specifically on the services, the digital trade, as well as the intellectual property rights. So, as already stated, cooperation on climate and energy is institutionalized through these joint working groups, technical arrangements, and collaboration within multilateral agreements such as the Mission Innovation Initiative and the Clean Energy Ministerial. So these are nothing but the legal agreements or arrangements, we can say, which embed the cooperation policy within the broader regulatory and the government norms. Moving on to the regulatory convergence, so harmonization of standards are required for the renewable technologies as such. Also, joint certification schemes for the energy efficiency has been there on the papers. Dialogues on emissions monitoring, reporting, verification clauses, frameworks are there. So this is what is the significance or the regulatory mechanism for the cooperation that is there between India and EU. Next, moving on to one of the most important core of energy that we are looking forward to is the renewable energy, which is also called as the core area for the cooperation. So it actually forms the heart of the India-EU cooperation, which is reflecting mutual priorities and the shared interests. Now, again, Sairam sir has already given wonderful practical examples on the India's renewable energy ambitions. But again, what we are looking at is nothing but India aiming for a large share of electricity from renewable sources by the year 2030. Solar, wind, bioenergy, and a small hydro power, these are also the priority sectors. India, I think we all are aware of that, has operationalized the International Solar Alliance that is known as the ISA, which again India and EU both support. Moving on to particularly about the European Union's energy leadership. So the Green Deal that I have talked about, it has actually committed to a significant increase in the renewable energy share across the member states, phasing out the fossil fuel dependence in power and industry. Obviously, a large scale investments have been there in the offshore wind, solar, and the green hydrogen as well. So frameworks such as the Renewable Energy Directive to guide the national actions need to be developed, and that is found in the Green Deal of the European Union. So when we're talking about the renewable energy as the core, as the heart of the cooperation, so what is required is the joint research collaboration, initiatives on the solar energy, energy storage, the grid integration, the capacity building in the renewable energy planning and the forecasting, best practice exchanges on auctions, grid integration and the financial supporting. Also, one of the most important thing would be the technological transfer. That is again fundamental because again, we are living in an era of technology. So advanced EU technologies in storage and the smart grids can obviously support India's energy transition, which again is aligned with India's goal of domestic manufacturing and the Make in India initiatives. So obviously, investments and financing frameworks are there in the bilateral instruments. So We have also looked into the cooperation within the broader climate and the sustainable development commitments, such as the NDCs and the Paris Agreement. So, India-EU partnership also supports the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, specifically talking about the SDG 7, that is affordable and the clean energy, SDG 13, that is the climate action, SDG 9, that is nothing but the industry innovation and the infrastructure, and SDG 17, that is partnership for all the goals. So, climate finance, that I have used the word, that again remains a very critical enabler. So India's climate strategies emphasize the support for the energy transition finance. Also funds for adaptation and resilience, especially for the vulnerable communities are required. And EU mechanisms, when we are talking about what I found while researching was one very important institution known as the European Investment Bank, which have actually targeted the finance and the technical support in relation to climate. So, therefore, as the global energy landscape, which is transforming, so future cooperation obviously must be there to achieve these new levels of ambition and sophistication which is required in the sustainability issues. So we need to obviously look into the integrated clean energy markets and the standards, the green hydrogen and the alternative fuels, the digitalization that is also required of the energy systems. For example, I have been talking about the smart grids, the Internet of Things, which again is trending as of now by the name IoT, and the advanced data analytics, which are reshaping the energy governance platform. Also, India and EU can leverage upon the larger multilateral architectures, such as the G20 energy and the climate initiatives, the International Solar Alliance partnerships, and cooperation with Asian, Africa, and the other regions for the shared learning. Obviously, no cooperation framework is without challenges. So, there are challenges and opportunities which are recognized in these structured responses also. So differential legal systems and policies, which actually creates frictions amongst the priorities. So dialogues have to be there for the regulatory principles. Harmonization in the specific sectors have to be there. Mechanisms for the dispute prevention and resolution has to be there. Also, when we are talking about ensuring the equitable transitions for the vulnerable communities or the populations, so some legal questions arise in our minds. For example, how to embed the social safeguards in the investment agreements, what legal obligations exist for the just transition that we are talking about, and also in relation to the decision making. So how can communities participate in this decision making? So these are some areas where shared learning, joint frameworks obviously can evolve. Coming to the conclusion, the India-EU partnership, if it obviously stands as a testament to what strategic cooperation can achieve, rooted in very shared values and reinforced by the legal and the institutional frameworks. Obviously, this partnership has expanded from traditional diplomacy to defining the global responses to climate change, energy transition, energy efficiency, and the sustainable development. So the future pathways spanning from the renewable energy integration, regulatory convergence, climate finance, green technology, obviously promises are much more. So realizing these promises, I think it requires continuous commitment, legal precision, and obviously a shared vision which is grounded on equity and sustainability. So as we look ahead, I think the India-EU partnership can be a beacon of cooperative governance, demonstrating how diverse yet very aligned actors can forward these pathways towards a very resilient and a very climate safe world. So my suggestion would be turn off the unwanted lights and keep the future bright. Thank you.
Go on, mic is not working. Thank you, ma'am, for the insightful session. Now I call upon Mr. Josephine Thomas, Organizing Secretary, to deliver the vote of thanks and conduct the felicitation.
Good afternoon. To everyone present here. At the outset, I consider it a great privilege to propose the vote of thanks for this international conference. Today's conference, excuse me everyone. Let's wait for 5 more minutes, then you're done. Yes, today's conference is of special significance. So just yesterday, India and the European Union announced the conclusion of a historic free trade agreement, often described as the mother of all trade deals. The negotiations that began back in 2007 have finally reached a meaningful milestone. What makes this moment even more remarkable is that while our global leaders were discussing this partnership at the highest level, our institution was already prepared to deliberate on the very same thing rather than a month ago. This truly reflects the academic foresight and relevance of this conference. At this moment, I extend my heartfelt gratitude to our chief guest, Professor Nicholas Desarlier, from Brussels, Belgium, for gracing us with his presence and delivering an insightful keynote address. I sincerely thank our guest of honor, Professor Dr. CEERA from NLSIU Bengaluru, for his valuable academic and practical insights during the technical session, and for his constant support in enabling this joint initiative with NLSIU Bengaluru, including institutional collaboration and guidance that he extended to JSS. I also express my appreciation to our resource person, Dr. Sanjita Tiwari, Assistant Professor of Law in USR and Ranchi, for joining us virtually and adding immense value through a section on contemporary legal dimensions of trade and energy. I place on record my gratitude to our patrons, our executive, our respected chief executive Suresa, our principal Dr. M. Vansima, for her inspiring leadership and guidance in successfully organizing this event. I extend my sincere thanks to Dr. Syed Gudral Hashmi, coordinator, for presenting his conceptual note and for his committed coordination throughout the program. I also thank Mr. Pranab Kumar Nair and Mr. Asri Chakraborty, assistant professors, along with all teaching and non-teaching staff, whose dedicated efforts ensure the smooth conduct of this international event. Now I extend my special appreciation to our student coordinator, Mr. Abhijit Kautilya, and all student organizing coordinators, whose discipline and commitment made this conference a success. Finally, I thank, the moment which you are waiting for. Finally, I thank all the students and participants for your active presence, thoughtful questions, and engagement. Thank you all once again. Have a wonderful day.